Hey there, let's talk about this topic. Sorry, I just noticed that uneven and I knew it would annoy me. I'll fix it another time for real. But I was in and out of that room and I messed it up. Okay. The topic I want to discuss is how this common block to healing reveals a flaw in our parenting methods. To preface this, not everyone is affected by this parenting method in this way. Not everyone was parented in this way. These are general statements which would be aimed at informing someone who is interested in being a better parent and understanding how one thing correlates to another, and also someone who may be feeling blocked in their healing progress. The things that I want to share are not for the purpose of trying to heal somebody else unless they are asking you to help them. So absolutely, if you are someone in the position to assist people to heal, this video is also for you. And it may be something you're already aware of, but I'm just going to outline it for information sharing's sake. Okay? So, let's see, this came about when it was just sort of like blatantly obvious to me in my interactions with somebody I care about who was explaining things from the standpoint of being a victim to the circumstances, and then further being a victim to circumstances that were outside of their control, which included somebody else's behavior. And this somebody else's behavior even had the ability to set this person off into a rage. So they were that much giving away their power to this other person to affect their life, their feelings, everything, because they were taking the victim standpoint. Now, in our society, there are many families who are in a lack mindset, a victim standpoint. Sometimes it's a result of the family dynamic, the bigger culture at large. There are many things that contribute to not only the belief that there isn't enough and this is a life of suffering and I am a victim to the things that are going on in my world, but also there's a lot of proof as a feedback to that belief, right? Because we live out the reality of what we are believing, meaning the perspective that we have is the filter through which we see life. So one person could encounter the experience of somebody else doing something, and it's just somebody else is doing something. It's not personal. I'm not taking it personal. It means nothing about me. And another person can take the experience of someone doing something, and it might not be to them, but they could take it like it was. They could take it as an act of disrespect. They could take it personal. They could take it as a reason and a justified reason to rage out. Okay? So I'm not using specific examples because I just want to keep a certain level of anonymity for what inspired me to bring this story forth. I'm using really general ways to describe scenarios for now. Okay, so when I was encountering this person who was describing these issues, I asked the person if they would like me to teach them how to heal this particular issue that they were expressing. And this person was like, more justifications on that, and more just like, that's not what they wanted from me. What they wanted from me was me to sympathize with their situation, but I had compassion for them, and I also had the willingness to assist them out of their place of suffering, because I could see that it was just a perception that was keeping them in suffering. And I also know that it usually doesn't work if I offer to help somebody, but I couldn't help myself in that moment. So I end up asking, and it was not something that they wanted to have help with. And I just got to thinking about it after. I'm driving in the car and I'm thinking, okay, so that person is not willing to look at their emotions. Like they're like projecting them out onto another person. They're saying it's their fault. They're the one. And this pattern is actually repeating throughout many scenarios in their life, because right before that situation, they had been telling me about another way that they were in this victimized state, but they were trying to heal. And that's the reason I really offered, because the conversation started by them saying, like, I'm trying to heal this. And it's like, well, I know how to heal. They're not asking me to tell them how to heal, but they're saying they're trying to heal it. So I let that go the first time, but by the second scenario, I was just like, I should maybe offer them just like this, I know how to fix this if you want me to tell you. But they didn't want me to tell them. And the reason is because their ego is set up to avoid feeling their emotions, to avoid prioritizing their emotions. And their emotion is what's anchoring in the trauma, the loop, the suffering. And the reason why their ego would do that is because it's also a trauma from childhood that they were taught and shown not to prioritize their emotions, because the parental units did not prioritize their emotions. So because as children we learn what we do what our caretakers do, not what they say. So if our caretakers don't prioritize our emotion as something that they're able to be present with, something that's acceptable, maybe something that we need advice for letting it pass through us, if the caretakers aren't able to do those things, then the child can learn that these things called emotions, these are bad. So they've attached a story to the wave of energy, and the story is, no. It's not acceptable. It's inconvenient. It's not going to be prioritized. It's not going to be looked at. In fact, someone's probably going to get mad at you if you're too emotional. Okay, so then now we have adults that have grown up and they're still operating that way, right? The operating system goes into the subconscious. And here's adults which are now very stressed because there's an evolution of humanity, and humanity is being called to heal at this time and is being called up to look at themselves and their misunderstandings. And it is a misunderstanding that as humans we would not prioritize letting an emotion flow through us, because as humans we are antennas and we do pick up the emotional waves and we can pass them right through us. However, if we make a story about them instead, that story can anchor it into our experience. And if that story is of lack or victimization, or if the emotion is interpreted as bad or uncomfortable, then this creates a loop, a feedback loop, where this is going to repeat in the experience, that life is going to be looked through the lens of that energy until it is rectified, until it is understood for the truth, until the truth is understood, which is that, I don't have to be a victim to an energy, and that my emotion is something that I can let pass through me, but that is also like not something victimizing me. And that what other people do isn't personal to me and cannot change my worth, my value. No matter what somebody else does to me, even if they devalue me, I'm the only one who could really devalue me. And in that case, That's another lie, and it will give me feedback, slap me in the face again and again and again till I realize the lie, which is that I actually do have value. So only these lies and misunderstandings are going to create discomfort and uncomfortable situations, giving us this feedback, right? If we've anchored in some sort of joyous, celebratory feeling, I think for the most part, we wouldn't be drawn to it to look. But as you get more comfortable and more cleared out of the veils and the filters on your view, you start to see that if I've made a story up that says I need a reason to be happy, that's a lie. That's not true. I can actually be just happy, just being. Nothing has to create happiness for me. If I need help, I could use a thought. I could use a memory. But I could actually just be observing the now moment in my surroundings. So if I have surrounded myself with unpleasant things or unpleasant thoughts, have I done that as a result of a misunderstanding about my experience of life? Just things to look at and be questions. And I think asking questions of ourselves, the ability to look into self, is so valuable throughout this whole process. So 3 things that can happen when we're avoiding emotion is we deny the emotion. Just like ignore that it's there, right? Now it'll still be there pressing on us. Maybe we act out in a rageful moment that is like a trigger. But we haven't like consciously allowed this emotion. It only sneaks out in those moments. Otherwise we're denying that it ever exists or that it's the thing that we want to acknowledge. That's when you get those kind of rage triggers where all of a sudden comes out in a moment. And that moment is like the reaction does not match what set it off. Like, you know what I mean? It's like seriously mismatched reaction to trigger, usually. Another thing is people can identify as the emotion. So I have this feeling of, anger, and so now I am an angry person. Like I'm anger, and I'm not going to let it go because I have a right to be anger. I am angry. Identifying as the emotion instead of recognizing that it is a wave of energy and it is passing through. Well, humans can't maintain the same wave of energy consistently for more than a certain period of time. Now, yes, there is that feedback loop, right? So it'll kind of subside and then come back up, subside and come back up. How close you are to needing to heal it would probably dictate how rapidly it's looping. But when you identify as the emotion, and meaning you recreate it for yourself to consistently feel over and over again, and start telling yourself a story about how you're justified to feel it and be it, meaning this, and this happened to me, so I'm an angry person now. There's another way people can hold themselves back instead of dealing with their emotions. They're now identified as the emotion, as if they are that thing, which is not dealing with your emotions. And another thing is looking to authority. Well, like I feel this, so tell me what to do. It's like reverting to that childhood moment where you're in a state of overwhelm. You're probably going to get in trouble if you express it. So you just want an adult to tell you what they expect of you in this moment, because you already know from experience that expressing how you feel and what your impetus is or your curiosity is or your emotion is not acceptable. So now it's like, I feel something, tell me what to do. Okay? So those 3 things can be consequential to avoiding and not dealing with emotion. Blocks to healing. Those are ways that it can manifest into our realities. Okay, so let's see. I'm just looking at my notes on this topic because I wrote some things down knowing I wanted to make a video on it. I wanted to explain about how emotion is a wave of energy. The feeling is the story being told to explain the emotion. So waves of emotion are just coming through all the time. The same wave that could be experienced as anxiety could also be interpreted as excitement, because it's just emotion. And the story we tell about it is going to dictate the feeling we have about it. And if we anchor in a story and a feeling about that wave of emotion, that's what's potentially going to create it looping and hold on to it for us as part of our reality that we have to now learn from, and eventually, if we want to be free from, we have to understand and 0 point and balance it out. Meaning, accept our own point of view that we've been decided upon when we told the story we did about it. Accept that that's true, love ourselves through that, and then realize that the opposite is also true. And once you've done that, you've balanced it out. You've said, okay, my perspective was valid and true, but this other perspective is also valid and true. Now I've created 0 point in this energy. Now I'm not a hostage to this energy. It's now released back out into its wave form. And now when I have that wave of emotion come, I can decide how to utilize it, because now I know I'm above it, and now I know it could be this or this. So how do I want to use it now? So you feel a rush of energy and it's overwhelming, or you had a certain experience at the same time as the same wave before, and you associate that wave with a feeling, right? So maybe you're like a child and like some sort of something happens at the same time of this wave of energy, and now your story associates that wave of energy with the experience you just had. So now you've tied that wave of energy to a feeling that you don't like. And now when that wave of energy comes through again, you automatically get that feeling again. Okay. If it's uncomfortable, meaning it's a misunderstanding or a lie, it will stay looping in the experience until it is understood. Balance or 0 point releases the story. Okay. That same wave of emotion that was once interpreted as anxiety is now excitement. I already said that. When our story is one of victimhood, we often hold on to the story that makes us a victim to the energy. So if overall you're growing up in a household where you are victims, there's not enough money, people are fighting over whatever, anything, food, mom's attention, whatever it is, there's lack or victimization or victimhood in the household, in the story, even in the culture. And then it's that much more likely that whatever story you make about the wave of emotion is going to be one of being victimized. And then you interpret any emotion sometimes as, I am being victimized. Especially if you live in a household where tumultuous emotion, even though it might not have been allowed in you, was always displayed by the parents. Because maybe they were suppressing it and it was only come out in rageful moments. Maybe they were underlying grumpy all the time because they weren't allowing themselves to process and understand the true reality of that emotion. So you may actually feel like a victim to emotion when others in the household are acting out to it all the time. And it may become very uncomfortable when emotions get high, and it could be very triggering to you. And all the more reason that you don't want to have that experience in yourself. Okay, big block to healing. Parent teaching children not to be present with emotion, helping them be present. Okay, so what we could do to solve this when we are parenting, help them be present and let the emotion wave pass through without making it mean something. Like my granddaughter in the car, and she was kind of like looking out the window at some things, and I sometimes move my rearview mirror at an angle so that I can just peek at her. And I saw her just staring out the window, and she looked really peaceful. And I just started singing to her. Hi, little Hazel. And she just went, no! Like, she didn't like that I had interrupted her chill moment, I guess. So I just said, oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Are you all right? And she said, no. And so she didn't want to talk about it anymore. I'm like, okay. But then she threw her juice cup. And then she wanted her juice cup. And I was saying to her, well, I am driving, so I will get your juice cup for you when we stop. We're almost there. And at first she was crying and she couldn't hear me. And I said, I know you're upset and you would like your juice cup, right? Is that true? Yes. Okay. Well, I would like to get you your juice cup, but I have to drive right now and it's dangerous for me to get it right now. Okay. So I didn't tell her emotion was wrong. I didn't make myself a victim to it. Everything was just matter of fact, It was like, okay, you're having a moment. Okay. Is there anything I can do for you? Do you need something? Nope, nothing I can do there. Okay. Oh, now you've thrown your cup and you do need something. Well, I'm going to have to need you to wait. Okay. We're just dealing with these emotions. Sometimes an explanation can be let through. Other times the emotion just has to be let out. But all of it is not upsetting me. All of it is not offensive to me. None of it is making me feel like I need her to be different than she is right now. She is acceptable to me whether she is angry, sad, mad, loud, frustrated. Nothing she can do can make me wish that she wasn't who and how she is. Right? That's how we want to be with our kids. That's presence. That's unconditional love. This doesn't mean that I wouldn't put a stop to something she was doing that was dangerous, right? Like if she, I don't know, somehow got something that was very dangerous and was throwing it around the car and we were at risk of crashing because of it or something, now I'm pulling over the car and I'm removing the thing from her reach and I'm explaining to her that it's dangerous and I'm asking her why she's doing that, if there's anything else that she needs, and then we're getting back on the road. I'm not saying to unconditionally love every behavior that's happening without showing discernment of safety and care. I'm not saying that. I'm saying being present with emotional fluctuations. And I have to say that that's pretty easy for me to do because I've done that for myself. I couldn't do that for my kids because I hadn't yet done that for myself. So I'm saying this from the perspective of, look, I know that it's really hard to give what you've never gotten. But if we're going to break these cycles, if we're going to make it so that our children aren't growing up into be adults who can't heal themselves, who can't be present with their own emotion, who can't release themselves from false stories that are replaying over and over in their heads, we're going to need to do this for ourselves and then for our kids. We have to break the pattern. We have to be present for our kids, and it's real important. And so the fact that I've done that now and I can do that for my grandchildren, I'm so thankful. And I can do that for my children now that they're adults, but, it's just not as relevant now that they're adults. And, they've come into ways of coping and managing their emotions, given the upbringing that they did have, right? But here we are talking about my grandchild who's under the age of 7, who's in her programming state. Up to the age of 7, children are being programmed with their environment. So what she's learning now is setting the foundation of how she will operate from her subconscious into adulthood. It's really, really important. Okay. Parents getting upset and making strong emotional display. I mean, the child is... making strong emotional display mean that the child is not lovable, wrong, bad, misbehaving. Like just her getting all riled up in the car. If that had made me mad or made me tell her that she was being wrong or bad, that carries into adulthood. Now, the key to healing is built in as something to avoid or be bad. If it's been taught to them as something that's bad, now that they're an adult and it's in their subconscious, so they don't remember that they're doing it because they were told it was bad. It's totally under the radar, under the level of consciousness. And our ego makes coping mechanisms like this little Jenga tower so that there's a whole bunch of things set up in order to avoid seeing it even as an option. Meaning, until this person, not from my granddaughter, but the other example I was giving of a person who was feeling victimized and was also not willing to learn how to heal it from me in the moment that I offered. Now I forgot the point I was trying to make. Because I had to use all those extra words to describe who I was talking about, or the scenario I was talking about. Oh yeah, so that person, they have me offering that, but they're going to have to wait until they get some other feedback in their life that will cause them to be able to be with that emotion. Or maybe it'll be more outbursts, and they cry a little out each time. That's the long way around. And it can also be very destructive, not only to self, but also to the relationships in life. And there are things that you can't recover from, like when you break shit, when you break your own stuff as a part of a rage trigger, some of this stuff can't be repaired. It's also scary, right? It's scary to be around someone who's out of control. It's not pleasant. Anyone who's in anger and outrage like that does need space, and we should all leave them alone. If it's a child, I wouldn't isolate the child who's being like that. I would be present. I would teach the child to be present with that emotion, and I would stay as calm as I possibly could. Now, if this child was lashing out and hitting me, I would get a pillow to protect myself. And I would calmly open my heart, be present. I wouldn't, once you close your heart and now you're scared and you're angry and you're annoyed and all this, now you're not being effective anymore. And then you might as well just give them the space. But if you can stay present and open-hearted, that emotion is going to disappear pretty quick. But the moment that you go into those other places, you're not going to be real effective. So you might want to go get your own heart open again and then come back to the situation when it's more appropriate, things like this. These are my suggestions. Now, to be fair, when somebody's in a trigger, that's a little bit different. So, somebody who's in a trigger is in a trance state. They're playing out a previous emotional wave that they have a story tied to. They're playing it out, and you can't calm them down. They have to be broken out of the trance. There are techniques for doing so. If you look at Faster EFT on YouTube, he has some techniques for breaking people out of trauma triggers. There are certain points that you can actually tap on them, not even without touching them. You can do it with your mind. You can move energy with your mind to tap. You can tap yourself and be in their presence. You can also say something that pulls them out of the trigger because it's so shocking and doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? It's like, why is your hair purple? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's shocking. It could break somebody out of a trigger. It could be like, all of a sudden their brain is like, what? And now you might have gotten them back. But they're in a trance state, okay? So you can't necessarily reason. You cannot reason with a trance state. It's an energy that's playing out. The reasoning has to happen within that person. And that's not going to happen until they're out of the trance state. And they have to be open to it, or they're going to have a lot of things protecting them from seeing the truth, right? Like in the example of the person I was talking to, they just were kept justifying why they felt the way they did. So that's a very common thing. When our ego wants to justify, it means that's our ego, and that our ego has something to defend. And what it is, it's like the protection or the avoidance of that emotion. So justifying it is a way of the ego avoiding having to feel it. Because the ego is like this little hurt child version of us that wants to protect us from feeling that thing that we had the story about that was really bad. It was bad. We didn't want to. It was overwhelming. We didn't know how to process it. And it's actually good that the ego has this until we come to a point where we are prepared with the skills and wisdom to be present with it, right? So when we come into adulthood, it's like reparenting ourselves through that moment of overwhelm or disappointment or pain or misunderstanding. It's like now we're the parent to our own part of ourself that lodged that in. So at some point in our adulthoods, we become ready for that. But what I'm noticing is a big block to that is in itself that a lot of us had been trained to not feel our emotions. And that is what we're actually operating with. And since being present with the emotion is the way to release it back out, it can get a little tricky. Being aware of that can help. And also being aware of how important it is to not perpetuate that with our children is really important. So that's why I wanted to share my perspective on this. What are your thoughts and experiences? Any questions?